Hello, thank you so much for watching the Sashiko live streaming. This is Atsushi. I will check the audio first. Just a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This should be fine. All right. Thank you so much for waiting. So this is the continuous version of the live streaming from the Japanese section. I will talk about a little bit challenging topics, but I thought that was very necessary to talk about it in Japanese first, and how one culture, how one practice can be transferred to the other language, and then become something different, and then came back to Japan. The risk of having that, you know, transformed culture as the whole picture. It is not the sample that it became the whole picture, but at the same time, it might be a good idea. I thought it might be a good idea to share that example with the Japanese people in Japanese so that I can kind of share the fear or the pain that I'm experiencing in English. When I was in Japan, when I did not live in the US, when I did not speak English for that matter, I, it was kind of difficult for me to understand the fear or even the risk of what I'm doing right now. It is it is kind of interesting to see how things changes based on the language. So today I will talk about that, and the example is Reiki. If you have heard of that, Reiki, it is the energy healing sort of technique or method or mindset or practice that's, I think that's well known for the energy healing, originated from Japan, but probably more famous outside of Japan. It is. I don't know if you have heard of that though. Have you ever heard of Reiki? I'll just do the pattern first. So I'm sorry. I'll talk about it after I made the pattern. So just give me 5 minutes or so. So yes, I will talk about Reiki a little bit today. And I'm not a professional. I'm not a professional in that. I do not have the proper education for that. And some of the people do not believe in those things too. I used to not to believe those things too, and it is very, you know, challenging to even explain that something we don't visualize. So it's not that easy to explain that, but I would like to try my best to verbalize that. I should have prepared this pattern just a second. Okay, I'm sorry. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you so much for watching. I think it was a very good Japanese session to explain what is that. The first thing I would like to say that is it is the energy healing by putting the hand onto some of the body part that they believe it's gonna be a healing energy from that hand. So this is not the live streaming to discuss if it is valid or not. There should be a very good discussion if it is valid or not. But if I focus on that, if the Reiki is valid or not, then that's gonna require a whole another live streaming or even like different session for that. So I'm not going to talk about if it's valid or not, if it's actually working or not. I will let that happen in the other places. So what I'd like to try is to talk about how it transformed over culture, and I want you to kind of, as the kind of pre-discussion, I want you to understand that I'm not here to discuss if the energy healing is valid or not, if the energy or something invisible exists or not. That's going to be difficult and completely another topic to discuss. So for today, I want to be on the same page that it can exist. If you believe that it exists, that's perfectly fine. If you do not believe that it doesn't exist, please hold it, that opinion, hold it, that belief, and then try to understand that some people believe that it exists, and it's going to be helpful for us to have the discussion. Like, you may ask, like, how about you, Atsushi? How about you? Do you believe in that? I do believe in those, and I'm trying to do my best to explain that with the logics and physics. I sometimes experience it, but I do not believe in that. And I need theory, I need the logic, I need to see it, I need to visualize, I need that to be generalized so that everybody can understand it. So if I say I understand, you might not. That's not good enough for me. So my goal is to make sure that everybody can understand it, but that's kind of difficult at this moment because I don't know how to do it. Sashiko is simple because I stitch, and I can do it because I am, I'm teaching that. But the Reiki is kind of different because I don't teach, and I do not, to be honest, I really do not know how to how to explain that, but I will try to do it. And also I will explain how it was, sort of how it became Reiki instead of Reiki in Japanese, and how it is more famous in the English rather than in Japanese. Okay. And if you have any questions in the middle of the conversation, you may ask the question. I will probably hold your question until I finish my topic. But this is the English version of Sashiko streaming. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those questions. So before I talk about that, now if you follow my Instagram, probably you understand why I do this kind of live streaming. Also the Instagram, because I'm kind of scared. I have a fear that Sashiko may become something completely different than some Sashiko that I know. And I thought that was my exaggeration. That was my security issues. I thought I was overreacting. I was thinking that I was overreacting in 2010, 2008. But the more I learn English, the more I see that Sashiko becomes trend. I feel that it is already happening. It is already happening, and it has begun. So that's why I am sharing a lot of stories, so that I can leave at least a voice to leave. And Sashiko may, or Sashiko is, let's say Sashiko is becoming something different from the original. I'm not saying that the new version of Sashiko is wrong. It is the transformation, so the culture should be different. Culture should change its form. I'm not denying that change, but I am trying to deny that the change cannot be done without the Japanese voice. It has to be done with the Japanese voice, and I don't think it's too much to ask. But in order to change it with the Japanese voice, the people who are changing it has to be able to understand Japanese, ideally the Japanese language, but at least Japanese culture, and that's what I'm doing. So Sashiko is now popular in English rather than in Japanese. So in the future, probably at some point, Sashiko will be imported to Japan from the Western society. Sashiko was once exported from Japan by those who non-Japanese who have English as the native language who learned Sashiko in Japan. And they did a great job. They did a very respected work to translate it. But the issue is that they do not know the whole picture. Yet, the Western culture is always asking for the one package. Like I too, we need one package of all the answers. So if you follow this, you get everything as the need in the market. So it is very understandable that the Sashiko became a little bit commercialized. In the process that we simplified the answers. And by simplifying the answers, Sashiko may have become something completely different. Simplification requires the goal and purpose, right? So how to do Sashiko became the main topic of Sashiko. How to make Sashiko stitches even, how to make those patterns, how. That's why many people think that Sashiko is the technique. That's not wrong. Sashiko is one technique. However, it's not a whole picture. Sashiko is more than technique. But in order to explain what is more than technique, then we have to explain what the Japanese culture is, what Japanese people are. As the result, it becomes something very, very challenging. And it is ongoing, so I don't know if it's gonna happen. I don't know if the Sashiko is gonna be completely something different. Do we keep the Japanese Sashiko somewhat in Japan and it becomes like Western Sashiko in the future? Maybe. Is it happening right now? It's happening right now. And is it too late? It's probably too late. Is there any Western Sashiko already? Yes, there are Western Sashiko at this moment already, or even Western Boro. So it is happening like today. And there's one example which happened already, which is Reiki, and that's the topic that I'm going to talk about. Okay. Just a second, I'm going to come back. So Reiki is the Japanese word for the kind of energy healing. We believe that we, as some Japanese people, believe that we can send some healing energy from our hand so that we can heal some issues on somebody's body. Again, please do not bring this discussion to if the energy exists or not. I believe that it existed in the very ordinary practice in the Japanese community because there's a word in Japanese so-called teate. That means putting the hand. Te means hand, ate means put it, like pat, not patch it, put it on something. And that word teate means treatment, usually medical treatment. So when the doctor says, please have the teate here, which means please treat the area which is infected or which is injured. So that word itself is already originated from that hand can do something. And I believe that before the Western medication system kicked in, they did not have that much medicine, so Western medication system is fantastic. At the same time, that was a little bit different from that Japanese, more like Eastern medication system. So about 100 years ago, one Japanese person established the Reiki. It was called Jikiden Reiki. He established that healing method I think based on his experience as well as those ordinary practice of Japanese hand healing. I personally believe that it existed everywhere in Japan, but he did such a great job to establish it as one culture, one practice. And he did not write the book much. His name is Mr. Usui. He did not write that much books, but he had a lot of student pupils, apprentices, and one of them, actually one of those, like a grand apprentice who lived in Hawaii. And I think she, I think it's she, Miss Takata, was the Japanese American. I believe that's the Japanese American who learned that method, practice, and implemented it to the Western culture in English. And they started developing that culture as the Reiki. We sometimes call it Western Reiki. And after World War II, a lot of things are kind of ceased to practice, and one of those Reiki is one of those like spiritual work that we could not really keep it, I guess. As the result, the Reiki developed its form, its practice overseas, outside of Japan more, and in 1970, 90, 80, 90-ish, the Japanese people learned Reiki from those Western Reiki masters. As the result, there's a big, also another movement in Japan about Reiki about 30 years ago. But that's the Western version of Reiki, and I've heard that 99% of the Reiki which practiced is that Western version of the Reiki from that Miss Takata. There are 1% of about 1% of the Reiki based on that the people's based on the not original, but the first one, Usui's Jikiten Reiki, is also available to learn. Probably, I think you have to be able to speak Japanese, I guess, but you probably can learn that. I mean, you can definitely learn that in Japanese in Japan. Anyway, so that's the kind of story of transition. There was the ordinary practice of one, let's say, energy healing. I don't know if it was called Reiki or not, but there was one very good, logical, establishing, very, good person to establish that as the practice, which is Jikiden Reiki. And of course, once it's established, it can be a bigger organization, and they can teach to the others. And by learning, they can enlarge the network, they can enlarge the structure and organization. That went to the overseas, and it changed based on the Western mindset. Again, there's nothing wrong with this process. It is happening. It happened, and everybody there is all valid. There's nothing wrong with that. However, one thing I really have to mention that is that it's not the whole story of Reiki, or even something that we do not have name left. I believe that most of the Reiki masters know that it is from Japan, and they know that it's developed version of Reiki. So they know it. They know it that it's something. What they do is based on the Japanese culture and based on the Japanese practice. They respect that, I think. But we cannot find those other kind, like, sorry, we cannot find the other kind of the similar healing practice in Japan besides those two practice anymore, because it's lost. Since it's not established, it's lost, and it's pretty much impossible to dig it out again. And we call history. That's so sad, but that happened. I don't want that to happen to Sashiko. It is perfectly fine that Sashiko is developing in its form in the Western culture, but some people really do not care, not learn, or do not pay attention. Some people do not care, or even worse, they intentionally ignore the fact that it's based on the Japanese culture. As the result, they will establish so-called Western Sashiko, let's say. And what if the people in Japan do not establish it, the Sashiko itself, and as the result, the Japanese people in the future import the Western Sashiko, and if everybody started believing that the Western Sashiko is the only Sashiko, then the Sashiko I practice right now, was the Sashiko my ancestor practice, will be lost from the history, and that's something I fear about. And then, of course, you may wonder, or Western people may wonder, why don't you establish it then by yourself? Well, that's one loophole, or even we can say catch-22 probably. By establishing, I have to make a rule. I have to make the process to follow. That's already not the Japanese ordinarily. It is good. It is very Japanese that it doesn't have the structure or rules or some protocol to follow. If I make it, that's gonna filter a lot of Japaneseness from it by itself. That's why it's really difficult to even be on the same page. It is the beauty of Western culture to define what is the issue, what is the goal, what is the purpose of things we're doing right now. However, when we make a goal, we have to define the rules, and when we have to define the logics, which requires a lot of right and wrong, justice, injustice. And that's how we develop the society. That's what it's going on in Sashiko, right? Like, you have to stitch in the certain size stitches, you have to do this, do that, and each corners, each centers. There are a lot of things we should do and we shouldn't do in Sashiko. But that's not the principle of Sashiko. It is one story. There are those Sashiko which requires those rules, but that's not the same. But in the Western culture, it is very important to eliminate the others. Eliminate might not be the good word. Frame it. So manual is the easy way. We need a manual to follow. We need a policy to follow. We need, like, in order to be free, in order to free and in order to respect the individualism, we have to make the rules. We have to make the policy. We have to make manuals so that everybody can be free. But the Japanese culture is not like that much. And the Reiki itself is very established because of him. But the question is, did the Reiki exist before him? Or only he is the only first person who made it? It's a probably debatable question, but I personally believe that the Reiki existed a long time before him. He is the founder of that Jikiden Reiki, the main source of the Reiki. But the similar culture without those establishment, without those rules, existed in the Japanese communities. It doesn't have to be Japanese for that matter. Some non-Japanese people in different continent probably believe the similar things with different names. So it's not only a Japanese thing to do. But my point is that it is very risky to talk about the whole picture without even imagining what would be like without that process. So Reiki is the healing power or practice to heal somebody with your energy from your hand. Some people, or majority of the people, think that you have to go through some certain training to do it, and I think it's a very good way to start it. But at the same time, the question is that necessary to go through that training to be one practitioner? Probably yes, but not always. If that existed in the ordinary, the training is probably the most efficient way to get it done, but at the same time, there should be those people who can do it naturally. And I think my mother is one of those who can do naturally. That's why it was not difficult for me to believe in this concept. And for my mother's, like in my understanding, in my practice of those healing from the hand, what blocks that healing is the purpose or even expectation. When I focus on the expectation or goal to heal somebody for the specific illness or disease, like let's say, like the biggest one is probably cancer. Like if I do some of those works for the cancer, I cannot do it anymore because there will be the expectation. There will be, if we have expectation, we start doubting if it's correct or not. Those like alternative medicine, Western, like Eastern medicine in contrast to the Western medicine, is a very valid thing. At the same time, it cannot be explained based on the Western logic. If it's called Eastern concept, then it cannot be fully explained by the Western logic. So in order to explain that in Western, I mean, in order to explain that, in order to understand fully, one has to understand the culture, which requires the language, and that's not fair to say it here. Therefore, I'm trying to do my best to explain that. But the question might be so if one doesn't require the practice or training, how can be able to do that? Well, my answer for that is I think everybody can do it without even training. It's just a matter of realizing it. The good example is the baby. A baby, like a newborn baby, I think they're kind of sprinkling those energy, healing energy around them all the time. They don't have any expectation, they don't have any goals, they don't use that energy to heal somebody. They're just there to focus on surviving. As the result, all humans should or will or may. I think they have it. All the humans have it. But when we start having the goal, expectations, wish, desire, greed, any of those, those things which define us human, then we start losing those capability. A cat comes here, like I have a cat, she licks my leg, I don't know what she thinks, but when I feel a little sad, she comes to me and she sits down on me and she, still licking my hand. That's very amusing. I mean, that's very interesting how animal can sense it, and they know what is the best way to heal it. They really lick if their family get injured. So cat licks to heal it. We put the hand to heal it. I don't think it's only Japanese thing though. I don't know if your culture. I don't know who is watching this, but in your culture, is there something to put hands when somebody's injured? Like, don't you use your hand to try to heal or ease the pain on somebody else? Even if one doesn't believe that there's energy from the hand, some people just put hand and they feel ease on that. And I think that's sort of the same idea of some energy or some caring. So the reason I keep saying like please care, care is that same energy which is invisible. I cannot thread for some reason. Why? Uh, so the healing itself is the same as caring. If you don't care, you cannot do the healing. So I think anybody can do it without those training, but at the same time, training is very good way to start without any. Like you need a guidance. Like not you don't need a guidance. You don't need a guidance, but guidance is good to have. So some people say that like when I was offering those service to the other people, they ask me if I'm tired after those sessions, and I said, well, no, it's not gonna make me tired at all because and some of them like some think that I am creating those healing energy on my hand from my whole body. If you like to watch some Japanese anime, they use those energies, Dragon Balls or those fighting animes. They use something invisible as the weapon, and they get tired after using those spiritual energy. That's one thing. I think that's true too. If I have to use that, it's probably I'm going to get tired. But when I do those healing work, I do not create those power or not a power, those healing energy. I become just like the medium. No, some like vehicle to bring one energy to the other energy. Um, I sometimes use the example as the uh, not a pipe, but some well, it can be a pipe. You have a very nice, beautiful stream from the mountain. You want to have that water to yourself, to your home, to your little tiny um, mountain house. You can go get those water by carrying it. At the same time, what one thing you can do is to bring the sort of cut the bamboo in the half and then make a little, you know, route, make a path from that stream to your house. That's the same. Those that pipe made by bamboo is me or somebody who practiced that Reiki. So I'm not using anything. I'm just transporting one energy source to the other source. In fact, since I'm not using energy, the more I do it, the better I get. If I stop doing it, the pipe gets dirt or leaves or anything, and it may be clogged. But as long as it keep running, the pipe is clean. So many people, not many people, some people worry that if I'm tired or if I'm doing that for and with tiring it, not really. It's more like the pipe. That bamboo pipe is my good example. And also some people also worry that if one has to, in order to be a practitioner, one has to be very strict to their life. They cannot eat meat. They have to um, meditate a lot. They have to have a calm mind. Those like requirement. They think that they have those requirement, but I do not think that that's a requirement. Of course, it's better to be clean. I mean, it's dirty is not a good idea, but the essence of those energy healing or essence of those practice is to transport the stream to the your house. The color of bamboo is not that big of the deal. The moss or the other like mushrooms on the sides of the side of the outside of the bamboo pipe is not that significant. Of course, it's better to look clean than a lot of mold on it. But as long as inside is clean and as long as the water is flowing inside of that pipe, it's not as significant. So Reiki is very, I think it was very ordinarily practiced for the many Japanese people, and now it's established as the Japanese healing technique, and with the purpose to heal somebody, which is great, which is perfectly fine, and it's perfectly great. But what I'm trying to say is that that might not be the whole picture of the Reiki, and I think many people know about that it's not a whole picture of Reiki. They believe that, at least they know that there's one Reiki, which is Jikten Reiki as the original, and some of them may think that there might be other Reikis practice outside of that in Japan, outside of that Jikten Reiki is established, and other side of that two big mainstream of Reiki. I think they know that. The more they learn, the more they know. Let's bring it back to Sashiko. How about that? I don't think that. Some people truly believe that Sashiko is the technique of stitching made in Japan, developed in Japan. Again, that's not wrong. That's not a wrong, but that's not a whole. And the problem is that people teach as if that's the whole with the good intention. I mean, if somebody's teaching Sashiko with the bad intention that they want to change the culture, that's very sad. That's very nasty things for them to do. That's very sad, and I should fight it back. But that's kind of easier for me to kind of to talk about rather than those who teach Sashiko with the very innocent good intention, and they just believe that the second resources like Wikipedia too. Wikipedia says that Sashiko is a form of hand stitching. It literally means little stabs. Little stabs. That's not wrong. It is true, but it may not be right. It's not 100% accurate. Well, it's not only my opinion. There are other. Actually, she's very famous textile professional, Japanese textile professional, and who understand English. She and I agree that the little stabs is not the accurate translation. It's not wrong, but it's not 100% accurate. Then you might ask what is the accurate translation? We don't have that in English. We will try to explain that as much as we can based on our researches, but we have to understand that there is some word that we cannot translate 100%. Sashiko is one of those. And what I fear about is that one day, if Sashiko becomes so popular, well, it's becoming so popular, if the Japanese decided to import it to Japan, they may completely misunderstand or forget about the other Sashiko which existed. And I'm not blaming non-Japanese people for that. I am actually worried about Japanese people as well. That's why I share the live streaming in Japanese as well. But I cannot stop all Japanese to not to import the Western Sashiko. It's impossible. I don't even. If they want to learn the Western Sashiko, that's perfectly fine with me. That's not my problem. However, I just like to offer enough information for those who innocently think that Sashiko is just a technique. If they are intentionally ignoring, I am not so worried about it because they will move on when the Sashiko is not trendy anymore. They have to move on because there's a reason that they're intentionally changing the culture. They are doing that kind of hard work because changing the culture makes profit for them. The changing itself bring them the money. That's why they're doing it. Once they stop making money, it will stop doing that. So I'm not worried about those who intentionally ignore the fact and teach. They will not stay here so long time. But if they innocently believe that if they enjoy Sashiko as the technique to stitch, they might stay here even after the trend is over, and they may innocently, with good intention, change the culture. And that's very sad on both ends. And if that the changed culture with a good intention is imported to Japan with a good intention, with the good people, and that's a very unfortunate cultural change. I would like to stop that. I would not stop. I would like to leave all the information, all the stories I have, to not even stop, to kind of to leave the opportunity to reverse it, if somebody wants to. So it was kind of a good example. The Reiki was a good example of how one culture may be, the Reiki was a good example of one culture can be translated, transferred, transformed to the non-related to culture practice, and yet can be imported to the original country. You may know the word sensei. Sensei is the teacher, the word for teacher. Uh, many people who practice Japanese cultural things like Zen, martial arts, calligraphy, you name it. They try to refer their teachers as sensei. That's a very respectful way to call them. But it's so interesting that in Japan, in Japanese Reiki, when I try to learn the Reiki in Japan, they call their teachers sensei, teacher in Japanese. That's how westernized that culture became. Instead of calling their teachers sensei in Japanese, they call it their teacher sensei in English. That explains how well that the culture is translated to the English. Yes, Sakura. I don't want that happen to Sashiko. Am I too? Well, I mean, if this happened before the internet, there would be the way to kind of change it. But since it's internet and everybody can choose whatever they want, only things I can do is to leave those voices. Sakura. So Reiki itself is not really related to Sashiko at all. Well, I wouldn't say at all. I sometimes feel that there's something in between these fingers and then thimble and needle. I always said that the Sashiko is one of the beautiful things about Sashiko is to have a conversation with fabric. So, oh my. Can you say hello to everybody, Sakura? Oi. Sorry, she's here to interrupt. Okay, little break then. I don't want to stitch while you're here. Because I don't want to stitch. So yeah, that's, I'm sorry. So Sashiko itself is not 100% related to Reiki. There might be something very related because Reiki is the Sashiko use hand, Reiki use hand as well. So there might be something related, but at the same time, I wanted to use this Reiki as an example of Japanese practice translated, transformed to the other culture, developed in the another culture, and then imported to the Japan, like original country. I don't think that Japanese people are losing those originals, but at the same time, it is true that a lot of the probably more primitive Reiki is lost. As I said that there's a Western Reiki and there's a Jikiden Reiki, the Japanese original Reiki. I do believe, and I think many people believe that there was similar practice around this in the Japanese community. They might not have called Reiki, or they might have different names. Same as Sashiko, they may have a different name, but the same practice was there. Similar practice was going on. Yet because of it was too ordinary for them to leave a document. We cannot find any documents to prove that. And as the result, it's kind of lost. We cannot dig it out. If anybody practice that kind of Reiki today, that's great. But I do not know any of those. Most of the people either or both practice those Jikiden Reiki or Western Reiki. But there might be those people who do not practice either of those, yet very powerful in what they do. So the culture itself is somewhat protected in Reiki. Sashiko, I don't know. I'm so worried about it. I may be worrying too much. Some people say as long as I keep sharing, it's going to be okay. But I can only speak on behalf of what I do, the Sashiko I practice, which might be different from the whole picture. And it's a little bit too late to represent to the other Sashiko as well. So some people may call it like cultural colonization. There might be a lot of word for that, but what I want to share today is that there is something more than that by just defining one word. So Reiki is the energy healing. That's very true. However, if this is coming from the other culture, especially the Japanese culture, where we do not always, where defining the answer is not the always answer. We can keep it open. We can keep discussing. Some people think that the Japanese collectivism is about harmony. Harmony means no discussion, no argument. No, we can argue, we can discuss. Just we do not define the only answer and exclude the minorities. So we can kind of keep it open a little bit. That's how we developed very interesting cultures. That's not the only reason, but that's kind of one of the reasons that we developed a very interesting culture. Western culture, we have to define. We have to find the rules. The rules are very important here. And Sashiko is following that path, which is great. It's good to know that what is the rule and what is not the rules. But at the same time, I just want to make sure that I leave enough information that there are something outside of the rules. Okay. It's a very challenging topic, especially if I have to talk while stitching. It's kind of another lecture topic to have with a lot of presentation slide. I'm not ready to make any presentation on this topic because I'm not really, good at explaining Reiki, but this was a one trial. I did it in Japanese. I think that was a good one, and I tried my best to do it in English, and I hope it makes sense. Sashiko is more than stitching. That's one thing I can say. Sashiko is more than stitching technique. That's something I really can say one thing. So I hope you keep enjoying Sashiko. And I will come back with the other topics. If you have any questions, please leave the comments. I will not talk about techniques because I keep saying Sashiko is more than techniques. I'm not going to talk about techniques. If you want to learn techniques, please consider the other YouTube videos and as well as my online or in-person workshop. I will teach you the technique for there. But everything else, like the cultural, philosophical, well, actually spiritual is also one thing. The Japanese culture and Sashiko. If you have any kind of question about it, please leave the comments so I may be able to pick up next live streaming. Besides that, I hope you have a great weekend and I will see you on the live again. Alright? ありがとうございました。英語でもちょっと終わろうと思います。なかなかに英語での霊気の説明は難しいやね。しかも霊気の話だけで終わるんだったけど、そこに差し子を結びつけなきゃいけなかったので、なかなか大変だったと思うんですが、また、英語をご理解いただける方は、感想等いただければ嬉しいです。下手くそだったなと思うけどね。それでは、良い週末をお迎えください。ありがとうございました。おやすみなさい。Thank you so much. Have a good night. Not a good night. Have a good weekend. Have a good day. Bye.